"There's only room for 4, Chloe said, her voice dripping with that polished, fake apology she perfected over the years. I stood at the edge of the glass-walled private dining room, taking in the scene. The table was meticulously set, napkins folded into stiff peaks, silver gleaming under the modern chandelier. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, sat comfortably at the head. To her right were my twin grandsons. To her left sat Brenda, Chloe's mother, already sipping a glass of iced water. There were exactly 4 chairs. "I texted you the reservation time," Chloe continued, adjusting her designer cardigan. "But we had to finalize the guest list for this room. Limited seating." I looked around the spacious private enclosure. There was plenty of physical space for another chair, but no staff was making a move to bring one. This wasn't an oversight. It was a perfectly orchestrated message. Over the last 3 years, since my husband passed, Chloe had steadily pushed me to the margins. I was the emergency babysitter, the silent funder of their holiday trips, but rarely a featured guest. My son, Mark, shifted uncomfortably in the hallway beside me. He had ridden with me from my house. He looked at his wife, then at the floor. "You really should have called ahead, Mom," Mark mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. To confirm, I looked at my son, a 34-year-old man, echoing his wife's absurd logic rather than pulling up a chair for his own mother. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice or ask why Brenda got a seat while I stood holding a wrapped birthday present. "I see." I nodded simply. I set the gift bag neatly on the edge of a nearby serving cart. Then, I turned my back on the glass room and walked back down the hallway. The hostess stationed near the front entrance looked up with a strained smile, clearly having witnessed the awkward exchange. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" she asked softly. "There seems to have been a miscalculation with their seating," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. "Do you have a table for one available in the main dining area?" Before the young girl could check her screen, a man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped out from the reservation desk. His name tag read, Julian, General Manager. "Right this way," Julian gestured, leading me away from the noise of the entrance. He didn't just give me a table, he walked me to a plush, semicircular leather booth directly across the main dining floor. It offered a clear, unobstructed view of the glass-walled private room. I could see Chloe peering through the glass, her brow furrowing when she realized I hadn't stormed out into the parking lot. "Your waiter will be right with you." Julian offered a polite nod before stepping away. I settled into the deep leather. The restaurant hummed with quiet jazz and the clinking of heavy cutlery. I took a slow breath, letting the initial sting of disrespect wash over and out of me. For months, I had made excuses for Mark. I told myself he was just busy, that Chloe was just particular about her events. But seeing Brenda sitting there, laughing with the twins while I was dismissed like an uninvited door-to-door saleswoman, clarified everything. I unclasped my purse and pulled out my phone. I didn't open my messages to draft an angry text. Instead, I opened my banking app. It was time to look at some numbers. The waiter brought me a glass of crisp white wine and a menu. I ordered the filet mignon, medium rare, and a side of truffle asparagus. If I was eating alone, I was going to enjoy it. While waiting for my food, I scrolled through my recent bank statements. 2 years ago, when Mark claimed things were tight with the twins' new private school, I had added him as an authorized user on one of my premium credit cards. The agreement was simple use, it for groceries and emergencies. Looking at the history now, the definition of emergency had severely stretched. There were charges for upscale salons, boutique clothing stores, and specialty home decor shops. Chloe's lifestyle was being quietly subsidized by my retirement savings. I watched the glass room, Chloe was holding court, gesturing animatedly while a waiter poured her a second glass of champagne. Mark looked down at his phone, occasionally nodding. They looked like a magazine cover. I tapped the screen on my phone, navigating to the card management section. Lock card. Remove authorized user. Confirm. The screen refreshed. The connection was severed. I didn't feel a rush of malice, just a profound sense of relief. I slipped the phone back into my purse just as the waiter arrived with my steak. It smelled incredible. Across the restaurant, Chloe glanced my way. I caught her eye, offered a brief, polite smile, and picked up my knife. Let her wonder. I was done paying for a front row seat to my own disrespect. Dinner was excellent. I ate slowly, savoring the quiet. No toddlers spilling juice, no passive-aggressive comments about my outfit from my daughter-in-law. Just good food and my own company. About an hour in, a commotion stirred near the kitchen doors. 3 waiters emerged, pushing a heavy cart toward the glass room. On it sat a towering, 3-tiered chocolate cake topped with fizzing sparklers. The main dining room briefly quieted as the bright sparks illuminated the faces of the twins, who were practically vibrating with excitement. Chloe stood up, clapping her hands, making sure everyone in the vicinity noticed the grand presentation she had arranged. She looked over the sparklers, locking eyes with me through the glass. She gave a small, deliberate wave. You missed out. Her smile seemed to say. I nodded in acknowledgement, entirely unbothered. Julian, the manager, materialized by my booth. Can I interest you in the dessert menu, ma'am? Or perhaps coffee? Actually, I looked up at him. Do you have anything dramatic back there? Something a little theatrical, just for one. Julian's eyes crinkled in amusement. He glanced toward the private room, then back to me. We do have a specialized molten gold leaf sphere. The chef melts it tableside with hot caramel. It's usually for anniversaries. That sounds perfect. I'll take it. 10 minutes later, Julian himself wheeled a small cart to my booth. The presentation was stunning, a perfect chocolate sphere that, when drenched in steaming caramel, bloomed open like a flower to reveal vanilla bean gelato and dark cherries inside. The steam curled elegantly into the air. I saw Mark nudge Chloe. They both stared through the glass, the sparklers on their cake now dead, watching me enjoy a dessert that belonged in an art gallery. I finished my dessert, wiped my mouth with the linen napkin, and asked for my check. It was a hefty sum for one person, but worth every penny. I paid with my primary card, tipped generously, and gathered my coat through the glass. I saw the waiter hand the black leather billfold to Mark. This was the part Chloe didn't quite understand when she booked the exclusive private dining room on a Friday night. I had dined at this restaurant years ago with my late husband. I knew their policies. Reserving that glass room required a mandatory minimum spend of $3,000. Mark opened the leather folder. His face went entirely slack. He leaned over, showing it to Chloe. Her confident posture vanished instantly. She snatched the paper, her mouth opening in a silent gasp. A table of 4. 2 of them children couldn't possibly eat $3,000 worth of food, but the restaurant didn't care. The policy was the policy. Chloe hurriedly opened her designer clutch and pulled out a familiar silver credit card. My card. The one she kept for emergencies. She handed it to the waiter with a tight, reassuring smile to her mother. The waiter walked away, swiped the card at the nearest terminal, and returned less than a minute later. He leaned down, speaking softly to Chloe. I didn't need to hear the words. The slow, horrified blush creeping up Chloe's neck told the whole story, declined. She scrambled, digging through her purse again, whispering frantically to Mark, who was now rubbing his forehead in distress. I stood up, smoothed my coat, and walked gracefully toward the exit. As I passed the glass room, Chloe looked up, panic in her eyes. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I simply walked out into the cool evening air, leaving them to settle their own debts. My house was quiet when I woke up. No blaring alarms, no rush. I made a pot of Earl Grey tea and took my mug out to the back patio. The morning air was crisp, and my hydrangeas were finally starting to bloom. My phone vibrated on the patio table. Mark. I took a slow sip of tea, watching a robin hop across the grass, and let it go to voicemail. It rang again 3 minutes later. Then a text popped up. Mom. We had a massive problem with the card last night. Bank says it's locked. Call me ASAP. I set the mug down and dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. Mom, finally. Mark sounded breathless. Listen, I think your account got hacked or something. Chloe tried to use the emergency card for the dinner last night and it declined. We had to drain our savings to cover the private room fee. The account wasn't hacked. Mark, I answered smoothly. I removed you as an authorized user yesterday evening. Dead silence on the line. I could hear a car engine idling in the background. You… what? Why without telling us? I was sitting across the dining room. Mark, you could have come over and asked, I reminded him. But realistically, it's my money. I reviewed the statements and decided I no longer wished to fund Chloe's shopping habits or private restaurant rooms. I'm not welcome in. Mom. Chloe was just stressed about the planning. I'm not arguing. Mark. I interrupted, keeping my tone light but firm. The card is canceled. Do not ask me to turn it back on. Have a good weekend. I pressed end. 2 hours later, tires crunched in my driveway. I was in the living room, folding laundry, when the front door chimed. I opened it to find Mark standing there, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He looked tired. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped back, leaving the door open. He walked in, glancing around the living room as if looking for clues to my sudden change in behavior. Mom, Chloe is incredibly upset, he started, keeping his voice low. Her mom had to help us cover the rest of the bill. It was humiliating. It must have been. I agreed, continuing to fold a towel. You didn't have to do it like that. You could have warned us. Just like you warned me there were no seats for me at my own grandson's birthday. I asked. Mark flushed. That was just a miscommunication. Mark! I stopped folding and looked directly at him. I am not angry. I am simply done. I'm done being treated like an afterthought while my bank account is treated like a priority. I walked over to the hall closet, opened it, and pulled out 2 large duffel bags. I handed them to him. What's this? The twins' clothes, toys, and the extra iPad Chloe leaves here so she doesn't have to pack when she drops them off, I explained. Since I'm an unpredictable guest at family events, I think it's best we take a break from the weekend sleepovers. I'm reclaiming my guest room. Mark held the heavy bags, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He had expected a shouting match. He had expected me to cry, so he could comfort me and talk me into turning the card back on. He didn't know how to handle calm, practical boundaries. Take care driving home, I said, opening the front door for him. The following weeks were surprisingly peaceful, without the looming expectation of hosting the twins every other weekend, or the constant stream of text messages from Chloe asking me to pick up a few things on my dime. I found myself with an abundance of time. I started with the guest room. I stripped the twin beds, packed away the brightly colored bedding, and moved the furniture into the garage. I hired a local painter to coat the walls in a soft, calming sage green. I brought up my old sewing machine from the basement, bought a sturdy wooden cutting table, and set up a workspace by the window. For the first time in 30 years, I had a room entirely dedicated to my own hobbies. Martha, my neighbor and friend of 2 decades, came over one afternoon for coffee. She stood in the doorway of my new sewing room, holding a mug, and whistled softly. "Look at you, Zelda." She smiled. "I haven't seen you this relaxed since David passed." "I feel lighter," I admitted, organizing a box of fabric scraps. "I think I spent so long trying to hold the family together that I let them walk all over me just to keep the peace." "Well, the peace looks good on you." Martha took a sip of her coffee. "Has Mark called?" "A few times," I said, "mostly to ask if I'm still mad. I keep telling him I'm not mad at all. He doesn't believe me." It was the truth. The anger had evaporated the moment I canceled the credit card. What remained was a clear, unshakable boundary. I was no longer an employee in my son's household. I was a retiree, and I was going to enjoy it. A month and a half after the restaurant incident, my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. It was a picture of the twins holding generic, store-bought, "We miss you" cards. "The boys miss their grandma," the text read. "We'd love to come over for Sunday brunch this weekend. Let me know what time works for us to head over." I stared at the screen. It was a classic Chloe maneuver. Act as if nothing happened. Invite herself to my house and expect me to shop, cook, and clean up after a full Sunday brunch. Once the bacon was served, Mark would inevitably bring up the credit card, hoping my affection for the twins would soften my resolve. I set the phone on my cutting table and finished pinning a quilt square. Then, I picked it up and typed my reply. "I miss them too. I have plans this Sunday, but I'd love to take the boys to the park next Wednesday afternoon for an hour. Just the 3 of us." The little typing bubble appeared, disappeared, and appeared again. 3 minutes passed. "Oh, we were really hoping for a family meal. Are you sure you can't just host us on Sunday? It's been so long." "Quite sure," I replied. "Wednesday works for the park. Let me know." She didn't reply. They didn't show up on Sunday, and that was perfectly fine with me. I spent that morning drinking coffee on my patio and reading a novel. I realized then that Chloe's power only existed when I agreed to play her game. The moment I stopped providing the venue, the food, and the funding, her demands evaporated into thin air. 6 months passed. The dynamic shifted entirely. Mark stopped asking about the credit card when he realized I wasn't going to budge. Chloe stopped trying to orchestrate grand family dinners on my dime. When we did see each other, it was brief, polite, and on neutral territory, usually a quick visit at a local coffee shop where everyone paid for their own lattes. One Tuesday afternoon, Mark dropped by my house to help me change a high-up air filter in the hallway. He climbed down from the step stool, dusted off his hands, and looked into my sewing room. "You've really changed this place, Mom," he noted quietly. "I have." I agreed, handing him a glass of ice water. "It suits me." He took a sip, looking down at his boots. Chloe was wondering, with the holidays coming up, if we were going to do the big dinner here again. Like old times. I smiled. A genuine, relaxed smile. "I think it's best if you and Chloe start your own holiday traditions at your house. Mark, I'll drop by in the afternoon to bring gifts for the boys, but I won't be hosting or cooking this year." Mark sighed, but he didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. He knew the old rules were gone, and the new rules were not negotiable. "All right, Mom, whatever you want." When he left, I locked the front door, walked back to my sewing room, and sat by the window. The house was quiet, secure, and entirely mine. I hadn't needed a lawyer, an argument, or a dramatic confrontation to reclaim my life. I just needed to stop giving away the pieces of myself they felt entitled to take. I picked up my fabric scissors, perfectly content, and went back to work. The hardest lesson to learn about family is that your presence is a privilege, not an entitlement. For a long time, I thought keeping the peace meant making myself smaller, swallowing the slights, and keeping my wallet open to buy a seat at a table where I was never truly welcome. But I realized you don't need a shouting match, a dramatic confrontation, or an elaborate revenge plot to reclaim your dignity. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop participating in a game designed for you to lose. When you calmly remove your energy, your time, and your resources from people who take you for granted, the chaos stops. You aren't punishing them. You are finally choosing yourself. And in the quiet space that's left behind, you might just find exactly who you were always meant to be.